Hello and welcome to the green team of the Legendarium. Today we are hosting good guy Phillip Chase, Ashaman,
Hello, everybody.
and Hurinfan.
Hola.
I will be your host, Dusty Strings, and we will be discussing Return to Edan. All right. Anybody want to go first?
Yes.
Ashaman, take it away.
Big surprise.
So, Philip, we all
Yes.
really, I think at least, we all really liked the parable scene where Dayraven is doing the two brothers. How did you go about writing that? That seemed like it probably would have been intimidating to do.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, three, for chatting with me here right now. This is a ton of fun for me to talk with you guys. I really have enjoyed our previous discussions on the Way of Edan and the Prophet of Edan, and I'm really thrilled to be here talking about Return to Edan with the three of you and hearing your thoughts and answering your questions. So that particular scene, and we're doing full spoilers right off the bat here, right? So
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
So that particular scene, Dayraven has. First of all, you probably had to wait quite a while to see the main character. Took him a while to other than the prologue, to
Just the prologue.
get on the scene. And when he finally does arrive, he kind of fairly quickly starts a role for himself as the prophet of Edan. And so what is he going to do with all this power within him that is urging him to wipe out humanity? What's he going to do with it? And I think what he does is characteristic of the person that I've tried to portray from the beginning, which is he tries to make peace. He tries to help people. And that story as a parable is, of course, like a metaphor, right? I mean, essentially, he's trying to send a message. And what he says about storytelling is something that I believe myself, which is if you tell people a certain truth, you just tell them outright in plain words, they're likely to forget it after a little while. But if you tell them a story where they have to figure out the truth, then I think it sticks a little bit better. They remember it through the story. That seems to be the way people work. Is that it has a deeper impact, let's say, on someone if you tell them something and they figure out that truth for themselves through the story. So I think that's what Dayraven was trying to do there. And with that particular parable that he was telling, he was trying to convey a sense that you can forgive someone, first of all, who does awful things to you, but also the idea that we are, all of us human beings, we are part of a great big family in a sense. So he's trying to tell the Torlanders who are present and the Cargiles who are present. And the Torlanders are the occupiers, they're the colonizers, they're the ones who have ravaged this place. And the Cargiles are the victims in this case. And he is trying to create a situation where there can be peace, where there can be reconciliation, truth and reconciliation. It's happened in the real world a few times. It can happen. It may not feel like it these days. It may not feel like it in the times we're in right now. But this is a process that can happen. It has worked. We have seen places where it's happened, and even personal circumstances where it's happened. So this is what he's trying to do in a way that is, I hope, comes across as sincere, but also spiritual, and in a way that captures, I think, because I spent a lot of time portraying the worst of humanity in this series. So I was trying my best to portray our potential for beauty, for love, for compassion, for, trying to explore the idea: are we worthy? Are we redeemable? And the elf has an answer to that question. The elf wants to end all suffering. It wants to end all this pain that we keep inflicting on each other. And it's a very logical position, especially if you're an otherworldly being looking in on humanity and thinking, gosh, this is the most destructive species ever to live on this planet. They keep hurting each other. They keep wiping out other species. They keep exploiting everything around them. Logical conclusion: to get rid of all that pain and suffering, let's just, relieve them of their existence. Dissipate them, let them return to the energy whence all things come. So, Raven, I think his heroism fundamentally stems from his insistence that human beings deserve a chance, that we have the potential, enough potential for creating beauty and love and compassion, that we ought to be given a chance at it. And that is his heroism, essentially. And that's what he's trying to bring about through the various parables and the stories that he tells. And I know that this is probably going to be reminiscent of the Gospels for many people, that they'll hear Raven sermonizing and think, oh, Sermon on the Mount there, you know. So, and that's in part, yeah, I like that and I want that. I'm not trying to set up Raven as a divine, savior or anything like that. He's very much a human being, but there is a tradition of prophets and seers and wise people trying to steer humanity in a less destructive course. And I'm trying to draw from that in my portrayal of Raven there. So
Yes.
Very good.
Oh, go ahead, Huron.
I was wondering, do you think that the Buddha would be on the elf side? Trying to escape the cycle of pain?
So this is something that I wrestled with, and writing this trilogy was, among other things, I'm trying to explore. I'm looking at my own understanding, which is not, I'm no expert on Buddhism, but I admire Buddhism a lot. I'm intrigued by it. I've read a bit about it. And I grew up in a Western, I grew up in a Christian tradition. So I'm kind of wrestling with, and I think I've talked about this before with you guys, but this is me really, in a way, exploring the Buddhist answer and the Christian answer and the various answers to the question of suffering and mortality. And so, yeah, I think the idea of detachment makes a lot of sense in some ways to me, but also there's a part of me that resists the idea of detachment. And maybe this is due to my own limited understanding. I love the idea of enlightenment. I'd love to be enlightened, but does that mean forsaking one's attachments? Does that mean not loving? Does that mean, and this is Raven's dilemma, earlier as well. How does he use the power of the elf in order to stop Bledla and the war? That's the central question of book 2, the Prophet of Edan. But that question doesn't go away in book 3 either. And I think, yeah, it's a great question. What would the Buddha be on the elf side? I don't know. I feel like here we are. We might as well make the best of it, right? Which means trying to live a good life, which means not necessarily, at least for a time, renouncing life. I don't think renouncing life is an answer that I'm quite comfortable with. I guess that's the message. That's the heroism that I'm trying to portray through this character, Raven, who has this big old voice inside him that says, yeah, humanity sucks, and the best thing we could do is to get rid of it. Whereas there's little old Raven, the human, of course. He's biased. He is human, and he wants to believe that humanity is redeemable enough, that it's worth giving us a chance. So, yeah. I didn't really answer your question. What do you think? Do you think that the Buddha would agree with the elf?
I think it would depend on the metaphysics of your world, and that if by destruction it releases them from a cycle. I mean, because a lot of the point of Buddhism is like they keep doing the same thing over and over again, and they just keep getting reborn into a world of suffering. But if in your world they die and they escape for this life, I think maybe he would. But if they were to die and just be reborn again into the same world of suffering, then
yeah, what's the point of that?
he would.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah.
You talked about Raven and him having the elf shard was like useful in the way that he was able to kind of keep it at bay because of the things he believed you just talked about. Do you think that, because we saw that some other characters couldn't handle it the way that he could,
Like
do you think that there were were there characters in the story though that you think probably could have handled it as well as Raven or even better?
Oh wow, huh? I think I'd like to think that Sequoia might have had a good shot at it.
Mm.
She would have
Yep.
done better. Probably she would have done better than Yoramon did. So he lasted a little
A
while.
few seconds.
Yeah, a few seconds. And there was a moment. He had his moment until the two high priests walked in the door and reminded him of his own selfishness, reminded him of his own harm, his own evil that he had perpetrated, and then of course he didn't like that and popped their heads like zits, and
Yeah.
and then that returned him abruptly, or that basically allowed the elf to take over in that moment. So yeah, I think there was something special about Dayraven. It's a great question, Dusty, actually, that allowed him to live with the elf. That is actually a mystery that I cannot really answer. Why, when everyone else who's ever encountered an elf has essentially dissipated into the universe, how is it that Dayraven did not do that? Why didn't he do that? And I did not even attempt to answer that question. I
His
think
love
that
of stories.
so that's right. Yeah, his love of stories. I think it has something to do with compassion, but that's about as far as I'm willing to go. So that's why I'd like to think Quara, maybe Urge when she was around, or Queen Faldira, Galdor
Or what
perhaps.
about? Yeah, I was thinking Galdor maybe.
I was
Yeah.
thinking of Galdor.
Now, would they have lasted as long as Dayraven did? I don't know. But all of those would have done better than Yoramon. Although he made some progress there at the end. I'd
Yeah.
like to. Yeah.
Bledla, I think, would have handled it no problem, of course. So yeah, so if I remember correctly, Yoraman also, some of his initial thoughts were, oh, these people are coming to defile this sacred place.
Yeah.
Which to me, this reminds me of how a lot of the people looking at Dayraven on the outside, they did see him as a divine figure, a holy man.
Sure.
And I think it's a good illustration of first of all, a human's tendency to divinitize other figures, but also the double-edged sword that is, let's say, narrative ambiguity, right? So they're projecting what they want onto Dayraven, and sometimes this can be very helpful, and then on the other side, you can have very destructive things coming out of this. I'm kind of wondering, after Dayraven is gone and stories about him proliferate, is the land going to fall into sectarian violence again?
That question is actually answered in the standalone sequel that
Okay.
I have written, and will be out in 2024 if everything goes according to my plans. So
The standalone sequel featuring Seren as the protagonist, right?
well, so we're doing full spoilers. Saren is alive at the end of this, so there is potential for her to be in that sequel. Yes,
Oh,
yeah,
man, I loved
yeah.
her. She was, oh, well done. That was.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I love her too,
Yeah.
and she kind of stole the show for me as I was writing that book. So I hope readers resonate with her character. For me, speaking of heroism,
Mhm.
her act of heroism, just first of all, even the somehow mustering the will to live, because Dayraven never could have healed her in the first place had she not had some will left in her to live. And after what she went through, I'm not
Mhm.
sure I could have found that will. It was pretty amazing. And then for her to find a purpose, being his translator, helping him really singing. Her songs
Mhm.
were probably a reason that he was able to hold on as long as he could in Cargillion. So she plays a very heroic role through all this, and of course, swimming into the dungeon,
Mhm.
through that very narrow space.
This is nothing like Crab Isle.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's the mantra that got her to do it and got her through it. But then afterwards, she was able to admit, this is nothing like Crag Isle. So
Yeah.
yeah, no, doing that was it was crazy and heroic and beautiful. And she did it out of love. Yeah, I love her character, and I hope people enjoyed her story there.
Ballsy move to start with a brand new little girl, and I loved it. I think I don't know. I think anybody who could read would enjoy her character.
Hope
Agreed.
so. Yeah, hope so. Yeah.
So I gotta I made a connection while reading, and I want you to tell me if it was intentional or not. So
Okay.
I noticed that everywhere Dayraven goes, he interacts with people. He gives them, I don't know, insight, I suppose you could call it, and it changes them irrecoverably.
Yeah.
Um, but those changes aren't always positive, right?
Correct.
So when
Well, I mean, we could talk about what positive means, but yeah, some people are given a blissful kind of feeling, and others are terrified. But let's say he holds up a mirror to people.
Ah, that reminds me, like, small tangent. What the punishment for Erkenwald was like one of the best things I've ever read.
Yeah, that was
Perfect.
awesome.
It's perfect.
Perfect.
It was
It's what I
so good.
it's what I've always kind of wanted to do for bullies everywhere, But yeah.
So what I was thinking about this is that a lot of people blame the fall of the Roman Empire on Christian and how their values changed the way people think. And I don't. You could probably talk to Ash for a while, but if there's any merit to it, I don't really care. But I noticed that when, like, I guess Dayraven's religion or whatever comes, like the people are kind of hesitant to fight. They don't want to pick up their arms. Uh, they're kind of crippled when they're being invaded by the barbarians. So,
Uh-huh.
is that was that a conscious choice, or is that just me reading into it?
Yeah, you're talking about the Torlanders,
Yeah,
essentially, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
the
So,
Torlanders.
see, one argument would be that Dayraven emasculates the Torlander army, or at least portions of it. It's actually, though, not the portion that has to fight the barbarians, the Ilarchai. So they're up in Torland. He never has any contact with them up there. He meets the Torlanders who are down in the south, in Cargillion and in Adanon, and he transforms them into. It's not that he changes them, it's that he gets them in touch with something that was already within them. If it hadn't been within them, then he couldn't have done that. So I think what he's doing isn't changing people so much as opening their eyes to themselves. And I said earlier, it's like he's holding up a mirror to people. He's allowing people to understand a little bit more clearly who they are. He's stripping away the narratives that we delude ourselves with. And all of us do that, by the way. We all delude ourselves with narratives. Sometimes the narratives are self-deprecating. Other times we inflate ourselves. So I think that we spend a lot of time. I don't know if lying to ourselves is too strong a way to put it, but we definitely go around with narratives, and maybe they're not 100% accurate. It can be quite jarring sometimes when you realize how someone else sees you.
Yeah,
Um,
what's the saying? We judge people by their actions if we judge ourselves by our intentions.
yes, yes, that's
Mm.
a great saying. Yeah. So what Daraven does when he meets people, in various situations, this is, by the way, right in the prologue, right? Boom. And I'm trying to set this up, and telling your reader again, this is what I try to do with every prologue. Here's what this story is fundamentally about. Here is the central, a central theme of this story. And he meets a bully right in the prologue, and he knows that is a bully, and because he can, through the gift, through the elf's power, he pretty much has a quick understanding of everybody in that room, in that inn. And for most people, most people, I would like to think that most people are actually more or less decent. We might be kind of selfish creatures, but I think we also are capable of, as I said before, beauty and compassion. So I think he recognized that, and most of the people saw that reflected, that part of themselves at least reflected in this guy who walks in and holds a mirror up to them all. For the bully, though, he does something a little different, and maybe it's an inevitable, that someone who spent their lives being a bully, being cruel, being egocentric, being a narcissist. Maybe that's all they would be able to see. But what Dayraven does, in my mind at least, is he allows that person to understand the pain of others. He delivers a very quick and sharp lesson in empathy. And that means that the bully feels the pain that he has inflicted on other people. He experiences the pain as if it were his own and understands then what he has done and feels a terrible sense of guilt and remorse and wants, I think if there's any salvageable, aspect of his mind, he will want to redeem himself in that moment. But part of the reason that particular bully, Baras, I think his name was, breaks down in tears is he experiences that pain, the pain of the people that he's been treating that way all these years, and he wants to make it right. You know, so yeah, I'm not sure that forcing people to feel empathy is a solution or not, but it felt good, honestly. For like you, I would thought, you know what, Erkenwald, take that, but yeah.
Yeah, there's a line in Malazan somewhere. You can't shove compassion down someone's down a throat, and would that you could.
Yeah, you
um,
can't really. And
yeah,
I think even then, when Erkenwald responds to what was done to him, and
yeah,
not really according to Dayraven's
Yeah.
intention, it doesn't go quite the way Dayraven would have hoped. That Erkenwald is still kind of a narcissist, and he's trying to figure out how he can become a hero out of this. And so he's already kind of reforming his narrative. And when he goes out to try to save Torhelm from the invaders, it's about reclaiming his ego, and to some extent, I think he wants to get rid of these voices, and he thinks the best way to do that is to reclaim his masculinity, reclaim his heroism, reclaim his mantle as the monarch. So I don't think his going insane and dying the way he did was at all Dayraven's intention. But that's unfortunately what happens.
no, Dayraven said that he was this the reconciliation between Kergillian and Torland was it needed to start with forgiveness. Um,
Yeah.
So you said that you believe everyone deserves a second chance. Do you think that everyone is capable of using that second chance?
That's a very good
Ooh.
question. Yeah, I mean, are there certain things that you do so beyond this line, you are no longer redeemable? And this is a question that comes up a lot with Malazan.
Mhm.
There are certain characters in Malazan that people will point to, and I don't know how you do this. You'll say, well, this person who did all that awful stuff, he's redeemable, but this other person who did all this awful stuff, no, he's not, because clearly he crossed the line. I don't know who draws these lines or how they get there, but you know, it's an almost impossible question to answer. Are there human beings who are simply, are there human beings out there who are, in fact, complete narcissists or sociopaths, and they just are lacking a part of their minds, the part that most of us have, which is where we feel empathy, where we have compassion. I don't know. I actually don't know. I wouldn't presume to know. But if there is a person out there who completely lacks the capacity for empathy and compassion, then it very well might be that that person is not redeemable, I suppose. But I
But
would
then
like
can
to
we
think,
blame them?
and then is it their fault? They have no choice in the matter, right? Yeah, it's a great question. So I don't know. Erkenwald is the closest thing I think the closest I came in this trilogy to
Mhm.
portraying a narcissist. No, he ultimately does not redeem
Mhm.
himself, in my opinion. He dies a horrible death. Not that I would have wanted to necessarily to give someone that kind of specific punishment, but I felt like there was some, I guess, rough poetic justice in it. But yeah, but he does some awful, awful things, all out of just for his own cowardly ego. He does some horrible things. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not the one to be able to make that call. I guess that's a cop out answer, but there it is.
That's my answer.
I think it's the only reasonable answer someone can give, unless they're willing to really take a stand.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a certain amount of privilege breeds narcissism, but
It makes it easier to fester in one. I
Mhm.
think privilege does, and it makes it perhaps harder But as Dusty said, is that then the person's fault if they grew up in privilege and they're less empathetic? You know, certainly there are people who grew up privileged who are empathetic. So, is that just because they have a greater innate capacity for it? I don't know. I wish I knew the answers to that.
Yeah, I think that we've determined that antisocial personality disorders tend to be at least partially genetically heritable. So maybe some people are just born broken.
Maybe. Or look, if I had the childhood that this person had, or had that part of lacked that, or had that genetic, that was
Predisposition.
predisposition, then would I be the same? There's a good question. I mean, there are some scientists who think we don't have any free will whatsoever, like Robert Sapolsky, right? So yeah, and we have someone here who agrees, and I don't know, I might agree myself. I read his book. I read Sapolsky's book, Behave, and I found it very compelling in many ways. And his essential conclusion is we don't have any free will. We think we do, but we don't. Fascinating book. I recommend it. Yeah. So, but if we don't have free will, does it even make sense to punish criminals? If we don't have any free will at all.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people the conclusion is. You don't have an ethical basis to punish people, except as a basis for reform. But I think that this is a conclusion that you can arrive at from the Christian perspective as well, right?
If we don't have free will, we don't have a choice in if we punish them or not.
Oh no, that's true.
Oh,
This is yeah, that's true, but it's not a very useful claim.
Whatever. So in your stories, you kind of like to hide little allusions to old stories that nobody ever reads anymore. Is there anything you would? Is there anything specific to Return to Edan that you would like to share for us?
Is it Surt bringing the apocalypse?
Is it what now?
Is it Surt bringing the apocalypse?
Oh yes, so Surt, yes, of course, yes. In Old Norse mythology, Surt is the dude with the fiery sword. Is going to end everything. He's the leader of the baddies, the giants and the Hellions who are going to fight against the gods and just basically torch the world. So yeah, that's Surt. Yeah. So that was definitely a very deliberate name because I wanted these people to they have some legitimate, I think, grievances too. Though I'm not sure running amok and destroying everything is the solution, but but yeah, it was interesting. I found myself very sympathetic toward Munzil and his wish for the ennoblement of his people, the recognition of their innate nobility, which was definitely not something that they understood very well, the way the rest of the continent perceives them as barbaric and less than human. So it was in some ways about reclaiming their pride, but they have in some ways, I think there are some things I admire about their culture. They're probably the least patriarchal of the culture. Certainly less patriarchal than Torland and even Elend and possibly even the Mark. They are courageous and loyal, and there's a lot of positive attributes there. But they're also, like older Germanic cultures, are vengeance-driven and prone to infighting as well as just violence. And so I hope that I in the Ilarkai, or the folk of the tribes, as they prefer to think of themselves, because ironically, outsiders saw them as one entity. It's all the same. They saw themselves, previous to Munzil's vision, as it were, they saw themselves as very much separate tribes with a similar culture and language. So Munzil's breakthrough is then to basically say, well, maybe they're right. Maybe we are one people and we're strong, and they better watch out. So yeah, there's definitely that going on in that part. And I felt bad about Munzil's ultimate fate, because here's the guy, he was the last survivor of the Grey Wolves. He ends up a kind of last survivor. There is, the other couple tribes do escape, from the Ilarkai, all becoming essentially, elf zombies,
Mhm.
elf dwolas. Um, but Munzil, again, is the last survivor in a way. And his ultimate fate, trying to essentially, I guess, reclaim at least the body of the person he thought he was going to have another family with, was a very sad moment for me. But seemed a fitting end for Munzil. So.
Can I assume that also that being barbarians, they don't destroy the land with agriculture?
Yeah, I mean, they would ultimately have to have been agricultural people. I don't portray that at all in the books. I think I allude to their villages, and they're semi-nomadic within a certain amount of territory. They might move their village, but I think that they would have been somewhat agricultural as well. So they certainly were familiar with agriculture. Um, so yeah, they would have understood the value of the land, and they don't destroy the land. They do destroy. They consider to be, of course, they call the people who live in cities stone dwellers and that sort of thing, and they feel that, and they had probably have a point. Munzil points this out to Yoramon earlier. Being in civilization doesn't make you more compassionate. It doesn't make you smarter, really. It just makes you a little bit more sophisticated in your destruction, and it makes you perhaps better able to lie to yourself about it, right? Because you can
That's
hide.
one of my favorite lines.
Yeah, yeah. So I think Munzo has a point there. People who live in supposedly much more civilized societies, they're not less violent. They just hide their violence better. They insulate their privileged people from the violence. So there's an illusion that the violence doesn't exist. But in fact, you could argue that such cultures perpetrate way more violence. Civilized cultures, that is to say. And certainly they have developed much more destructive weaponry, so yeah, I think Munzel has a pretty good point. Civilization has not necessarily, and in all cases, elevated people to be better, so.
So maybe to be better, we should all go back to doing blood eagles.
Mhm. Good old Blood Eagles. Yeah.
That was one of the
Yeah.
most disgusting things I've ever read, so thank you, Philip.
Yeah, it's
You're
the first
welcome.
time Huron's encountered a blood eagle.
I've never seen it before, and I wanted to throw up.
Really? You've never encountered a Blood Eagle? Well, you're
No,
probably fortunate.
I'd never heard of it.
Yeah, I mean, you will find descriptions of that exact thing. So I didn't make it up. It's a thing.
You
But
destroyed my
yeah,
innocence.
sorry. Yeah.
By the way, I really liked how the leader of the Raven Eyes had one eye himself.
Yeah.
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 No points to me for getting the reference there, but I really liked it.
Yeah, and he's a survivor. He's a clever one. And he's the one at the end who says, "Okay, well, they're all gone. I'm getting out of here." So you might see him again. But
Oh, I like that idea.
yeah.
Yeah. He goes around collecting knowledge, learns how to read.
Yeah.
Well,
He's
his
civilized now.
name, which for some odd reason is escaping me at the moment, is actually one of Odin's names.
Yeah. I think I
Oh.
recognize that.
Yeah. I can't. I don't know why I can't remember his name. Maybe it's just been a long day, but I'll probably think of it at some point. But yeah, his name is one of Odin's many names. So
Yeah. Odin's up there for like guy with the most names, right?
he is. I mean, he has a ton of names, and he is very full of guile and almost. I wouldn't go as far as to say malice, but he's very dangerous. Odin is. He's a trickster in some ways too. Very clever. Don't mess with Odin. Yeah.
Yeah. I got a raven tattoo in no small part because he's probably my favorite mythological deity.
Ah, okay, cool. Yeah, I like it.
Through all of our episodes, I've praised your prose stylings. I think you knocked it out of the park, especially in Return to Edan. But
Bulwark. Sorry, Bulwark is his name. Yeah.
Mm.
Bulwark.
Yeah.
You knocked
Sorry.
out of the park in this book. You're fine. I've introduced it. I felt a lot more emotionally invested in a lot of the scenes and characters, especially the tension with the Kergillian and the Torlanders, the like
Uh-huh.
forgiving each other scene, or the parable, or really anything with Saren and the ending with Dayraven.
Uh-huh.
Is there anything that you did differently in this book, or were there different inspirations? I know you read
Uh,
it afterwards.
one of the
You
big
wrote it last, right?
I did, yeah. So I was in my 30s when I wrote the first two books, and I was in my 40s when I wrote the third. So I was older. That's one thing. Another difference is I read Malazan, and I had not read Malazan before when I wrote the first two books, and I had read Malazan when I wrote the third book. So I don't know if the third book reminds anyone anywhere of Malazan in any way, but I think
Ashen.
Saren.
maybe, yeah,
Saren.
maybe. Yeah, I mean, you know what's funny? I actually had read Malazan before writing this book, and obviously I had met Saren Paddock in
Oh,
Malazan, but I wasn't thinking of her at all when I named this character. It actually is the Welsh name for star is Saren.
interesting.
Oh,
So
Okay.
I just only in retrospect realized, oh yeah, Erickson had that name too. I don't know if where he took it from, but I actually took it from the Welsh because she is, of course, well, she's half Adamese and half Cargilese. But yeah, I wanted her to have a Celtic sounding name, and I decided that I've always liked the Welsh word for star, Seren. So I thought, let's name her Saren. And then later realized, oh, kind of pleased actually that Erickson had a character of the same name. So yeah,
I think the characters would be friends as well.
I think so. I think
Yeah.
so. I think they would
Mm.
be good friends. Yeah, I'd like to think that. Yeah, I like
I like
Saren,
Saren
and
Paddock.
I mean, she has her own trauma too, doesn't she? Yeah, which
Mhm.
we're not going to talk about here, but maybe someday we'll talk about it. Yeah.
Oh, fingers
So, but
crossed.
Teaser for
yeah.
listeners.
Yes, yes. So yeah, but yeah, no, I think I had read other things too, by the way, between because I had a period when I had finished the first two books, a sort of a gap where I thought, you know what, let me read a bunch more fantasy, and Malazna was part of that. But there were others as well that I read, and I don't know how much of an influence I can say any of them are necessarily, but um, I'd like to think that maybe a little bit of Malazan bled into the third book. Uh, I don't feel like it's a ton different from the first two, and I feel like they are all one story. And yet, I do recognize that the third book is different, is different in some ways, and it is different in terms of just what a normal fantasy trilogy would be, right? I mean, I think most people would agree with the idea that book two ends where normally the story would end, and then, well,
Mhm.
what's he going to do in the third book? And I wanted to go where most fantasy doesn't tend to go. Like, okay, so the hero gave everything to save the day. Well, what then? What happens to the hero afterwards? If he gave everything or she gave everything, what happens to them? And also, war is over, but guess what? You know, when a war ends, you don't just, okay, well, everything's great now. Let's go back to our normal lives. You know, that's not how it works. So, you know, what are the consequences? I really wanted to explore that in this, and hopefully in a way that isn't boring, because I think most people would think, oh, that sounds really boring. You know?
And then they
Um,
all died of plague.
yeah, yeah,
Um, yeah, I said in the episode that something that I think is quite unusual and I quite like about this trilogy is that each book feels extremely distinct from the other books,
uh-huh,
but it still does feel like a cohesive whole in the end.
uh-huh.
So like when I think back on it, I can very clearly remember what's in book one. I can very clearly remember what's in book two. And
Yeah,
obviously I can, like there's very sharp delineations in my mind. And that was actually like that's really nice, I think. That's not something you see all the time. A lot of fantasy series they can kind of blend into one another and you can forget
yeah.
what happened where. But even
I
though
could
there's the
not
same
tell you.
characters. Yeah,
I
go
could
ahead.
not tell you what happens in which book of Wheel of Time at this point. I
Yeah.
mean, I read like a decade
Yeah.
ago. So yeah. But yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think the same way myself, but I have no idea how others would experience it. But yeah, I do feel that each has a very distinct personality.
Mhm.
And it's doing has a slightly different mission to it, I guess. But I've always thought of it as one story as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the third one is really, where, like I said before, I think I kind of go my own way more. But all three, the first one is meant to be the departure. I think I've said this to you guys before, but the first one is in the hero's journey terms. Departure is book 1, Transcendence is book 2, and Return is book 3. And yes, I do mean that word return in several possible ways, right? But yeah, that's essentially what I was trying to do with the third book and that's the part of the hero's journey that gets short shrift, I think, most of the time.
Yeah.
There are some exceptions. You do have the Scouring of the Shire, for example, or you have I can't think of too many other modern fantasies where you do get a lot of other than just a little epilogue or something. Most of the time, I don't think they do focus a whole lot on what happens after.
Can we talk about the return to the mark?
Sure.
Mm.
Do you want to take it, Dusty?
Oh, you want me to talk about Return to the? Oh, but
Hey, can I talk about something I really like about the Return to the Mark?
he should first. Yeah,
Sure,
go with
yeah.
something positive first.
Yeah, I really, really loved the moment where Dayraven is looking upon the home that he's returning to with new eyes, and he's seeing almost for the first time how truly beautiful it is. That was probably my favorite little sentence that you wrote or little paragraph you wrote in the book. It was very good.
Thank
Or
you.
talk about
Yeah.
that.
Go ahead.
I like when he reunites with Ebba.
Oh yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, good. That was important to me. That Ebba, we go back to Ebba, and they've changed. Obviously, both of them have changed, but and yet they still love each other.
Mhm.
That's still there.
Mhm.
That part of who they are. That will never go away. But yeah, if anyone who's ever left home where they grew up and lived abroad or gone somewhere else and then returned, or even people who go off to college, that's a journey. You come back from a different person, and you feel that when you come home,
Mhm.
visit your family, your relatives, and you feel just a little bit outside. You feel a little sense of you still love the place, and you feel incredible attachment to it, but you also feel a little weird because it's a bit surreal. You've moved on, and this place feels. Of course, it hasn't been stagnant either. The people there have lives, and they're going as whatever direction they're going. But you've been out of touch. You're out of tune with the place, and it's changed, and you've changed, and that can be very jarring, I think, for people when they experience that. But the affection doesn't go away. It's just a recognition that, oh, I'm not the same person that I was. And by the way, none of us are. Even if you stay in the same place all your life, you're not the same person you were 10 years ago. Literally every cell in your body is different. You're a different person with more experiences and more layers and scars, and you can never go back. So
I like that. That's nice. I mean, even talking to these guys about that part helped, and then hearing it from you helped too. They keep mentioning me about this part because right in Torhelm when the Elfshar took over Yoraman and then took over the whole army, like all of that was like a crescendo for me. So I was
Right.
like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm good. So when the next part happened where there's like this zombie army walking across the land, and then they need to go back to the mark and convince these just completely stubborn people to just get out of the way, and then they end up having to deal with it, and then the stuff that
Yeah.
I didn't think was going to happen happened anyways. I was like, for me, I was kind of like, I had like at Torhelm I had finished, so that other extra stuff was tough for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear
So,
you. I mean, I think if this were a normal fantasy, it would have ended at Torhelm, right?
mm,
And maybe there would have been some nice reunions. I mean, there is a nice reunion. I had to give Dayraven and Sequara another moment at least.
yeah.
But it was important enough to me, and I realized that this is not the way you're supposed to do it. But it was important enough for me that I wanted these moments, but I also wanted the story to end in the mark. And I had no way to do it. It's something by the way, I wrestled with this with AP for a while because AP pointed out the same thing you're pointing out. It's like, look, this feels like the climax, and then you have this climax and it feels like a resolution, but then suddenly whoops, another, kind of like climax after that. And you're going to have some readers who are not going to like that because they're expecting, if this were the normal thing, they're expecting that to be the ending, the grand finale, and yet you do another thing afterwards. And I said, yeah, I know that, and I had no way to resolve that at all, because I needed what happened at Torhelm to happen at Torhelm. All that had to happen in Torhelm, especially because that's where that's where the war started. That's where Erkenwald was, Yoruman, everybody. But also there were things I needed to happen in the Mark, and Dayraven meeting Ebba again, him returning to where it all started. Very important to me. So that was more important to me than having, I guess, the ending I was supposed to have. That would have been neater, I suppose, because it's not quite neat the way I have these two crescendos at the end. It's not the way you're supposed to do it. That's not what they say in all the guidebooks, So I took a risk there. I took a lot of risks, I felt, when I was writing this, and I had no idea what people were going to think. I actually thought, people might read this and think this is utter rubbish. I really, of all the three books, this was the one I didn't really understand how people would respond to it. And that was one of the things. What you're talking about, Dusty, was, gee, are they going to be mad because it looks like there's a resolution in Torhelm, and then I do this other thing, and it's like, whoop, gotcha. That's not the way I wanted it to feel, but I can understand where someone might feel that's kind of what it was. But yeah. So you other two reacted differently, I guess, to the Mark.
Yeah, I liked it.
I loved it.
Yeah.
I thought the language at the end, especially as Dayraven dies, was just so moving and inspiring. But one of our listeners, he didn't like that Dayraven's sacrifice felt cheap because he only died because the people of the Mark were idiots.
Well, guess what? People are idiots.
Uh,
I think to provide a bit of a defense, it's very easy for us in our modern world to forget how dangerous it has been historically to have wild tribes moving through your lands.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a cultural thing too.
That's what
to
I
understand.
come from it,
Yeah, the mindset of ancient cultures is not the same as a modern mindset. Your land is part of who you are, and someone trampling all over it is a direct threat to your person. Your tribe is who you are. Anyone who threatens your tribe threatens you on a very personal level, and you must respond to that. So there's intense loyalty. Their identities are wrapped around the Mark, and there is no separating them from it. So to ask them to leave their home and let some foreign army trample all over it would be akin to asking them to give up their identity. And it's just, that's who they are. And Dayraven, on some level, I think, knew that all along, because that's where he came from. But he was hoping he would be able to convince them to do that. But yeah, I mean, look, we all grow up with a cultural lens. We all grow up with a worldview. And when someone else with a different worldview tries to show us something, we can be very resistant to it. It's not always even a question of will. It's a question of ability. Sometimes you just can't see what other people see because your worldview is so, it's there and you can't see any other way. It's like you can't see colors that you don't know exist, right? So that's how it is for the people of the Mark. They're going to defend their home, and it is better to die defending their home than to leave it to someone else, right? So yeah, I mean, that and other things were going against Dayraven in that meeting. He had not avenged his father properly.
Mm-hmm.
And in that culture, once again, vengeance is very important. It's his duty as a son to avenge it. And he's hanging out with the guy who killed his father, right? So they're not going to be inclined to necessarily feel like agreeing with somebody like that. It's like they see him as his old his father's best friend, Ebba's father. essentially sees Dayraven as a traitor because of that, particularly. But yeah, and this was a guy who was like a second father to him. And that's because that's his view, that's his culture, that everything he's ever known has told him to see the world this way. And it's very difficult to get outside that box.
I'd assumed when I was reading also that that it was a cultural issue, largely because of pride and honor, and that walking away and letting these people walk wasn't like you said, it was an identity, but it was also a lot about how other people would perceive them. Yeah.
Right. Definitely. And they don't believe what they're hearing. So they know there's a huge army coming at them. And that doesn't matter to them because like the the cultures I'm basing them on, Old English culture, the thing that they would have worshipped the most would be courage in the face of certain doom. And never mind that they're vastly outnumbered by this army that's coming at them. They are going to defend their home, even if it means being overwhelmed by this huge army. So that courage in the face of certain doom. Even when you know you're going to lose, there's these wonderful lines in Old English from the Battle of Malden, where these English were fighting against these Viking invaders, and the English were getting wiped out. And one of them, I'm sure this didn't actually happen in the real battle, but in the poem that we have, one of the English warriors stops to say, "He shall the herdra herta the kenra, mod shall the marath urmayan litlath," which means our purpose shall be the harder, our hearts shall be the keener, our courage shall be the greater as our might lessens. And they're dying, and they're avenging their dead lord, and they're going to get wiped out. They know it, but they're not going to run away. They're not going to run away. And that's the people of the mark right there. So yeah, that's where they're coming from.
That was
Actually,
awesome.
whipping out some Old
awesome.
English is a real power move, by the way.
Yeah.
Small tangent, but when you speak a second language, people are inevitably going to ask you to say something, right? Do you have a go-to phrase?
Oh, well, the one I just recited is a pretty good one, but I like
I
to
agree.
recite the opening lines of Beowulf. There's another good one. Wat we gardenen jerdagum theod kuning afrimja frunan, huda athalingus ellen fremedon. So yeah, but yeah, there are certain poems that I've more or less memorized and that sort of thing. So it tends to be poems. There is prose in Old English too, though. But yeah.
That sounds awesome, by the way.
That's
Yeah.
a great party trick.
Yeah.
I think so. You wouldn't believe how popular I am at parties.
I agree. I won't believe you. Oh, well, I always go for なんか言っても通じないから言う意味ない, which means even if I say something, you're not going to understand, so there's no point in saying it.
I love it.
Ha! I like it.
Good one. I like it. Unless I speak Japanese.
Speaking of separateness and different cultural lenses, I'm curious. So the way that you've set up the elf in this book, I'm really left wondering, is there only one elf, or is the concept of another elf even possible in this world? And if so, would they necessarily agree with this elf about its outlook?
Yeah. So an elf is the way I think Dayraven ultimately comes to perceive the elf is that it is a kind of a window into Edan, which is the primal energy that infuses everything. The great source whence we come and whither we will return. That is what Edan is. And the elf is essentially, although our human perception turns it into something we can wrap our minds around, that is to say. In other words, anthropomorphizes it, makes it into a human form or an animal form or something that we can process. That doesn't change what it is, though. And I think what Dayraven at least comes to understand the elf as a window into that place where that eternal place where there is no past, no present, no future, all is one. The elf in that sense is outside of time, and it is transcendent of all that. So could there be more than one? Yes, I think so. Are the elves somehow maybe holes in normal existence, what I call the realm of forms? That they are places more than entities, perhaps, into that eternal state. Maybe. I'm not sure. Do they have their own volition? Do they have their own will? Do they have their? Are they? Do they say, "I'm gonna go, visit a village today and scare some people," or I don't think so. But it seems when an elf interacts with a person the way that the elf did with Dayraven, that it acquires thought, that it acquires a certain kind of perception. Because that's one thing I can say for sure. And Dayraven, I think, realizes this as well. And when he sees the elf after Yormon has taken that power from him, and has also taken over all the Illarkai, what Dayraven recognizes that a bit of that elf is actually me, because the elf was inhabiting me, and its desire to end suffering may in part actually be part of me, and its desire to inflict all kinds of strife, its desire, it may come from Yormon, or it may even come from the Illarkai that it's taken over, that they have affected it, and it's I don't know if desire is the right word, but what it intends to do, right? Or does it have intention? Maybe. But it is reacting. It is clearly reacting to it's the humans that it comes across, and so that's an interesting, I guess, aspect of the elf. But yeah, it is something that is way outside of our ability to comprehend, I think. But yeah,
Good answer.
if that makes any sense.
Yeah. It does. I like how you in the trilogy still maintain the utter incomprehensibility of the being. It's really difficult to do. if you like in horror movies, if you show the monster too much, then the monster loses its effectiveness. But you were showing the elf quite a bit, so well done. This is very impressive.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there are some mysteries that you just can't answer, and you have to allow a reader to make up their own mind, So hopefully the elf, there's still some mystery and wonder there left at the end of all this. Certain questions that you'll have to figure out yourself, I guess. Yeah.
Tangentially related, do you read much weird fiction?
Not too much, to be honest. A lot of what I was doing there with the elf comes from my engagement with, and again, I'm no expert, but with my engagement with Eastern philosophy and Buddhism and Hinduism, and just the philosophical underpinnings, I guess, of the magic that I'm portraying here in this trilogy really do come from there, and my attempts to understand it, I guess. But yeah, I mean, it's a creature that I hope not to meet under the wrong circumstances. But on the other hand, it's beautiful. It is, it's like looking up at the stars on a clear night and seeing the Milky Way. There is a sense of the elf being something beautiful and wonderful, full of wonder and mystery and transcendence. And it also, when you look up at those stars on a beautiful, clear night, can make you feel kind of tiny, right? It can it can give you a perspective of yourself as really more or less a mote of dust. So that's, I guess something I'm also trying to get across with the elf, the idea that we are, after all, little tiny motes of dust in all of this, and there is perhaps something much, much larger that we can't really wrap our tiny little minds around, but that we're part of. And we might have moments of perceiving this. And we talked about this before, I think, when we had our last talk, but people who do have these transcendent experiences, whatever religious or non-religious tradition they come from. A lot of people have experienced that state of bliss, but it also is somewhat terrifying to realize one's own ephemeralness in that way. But yeah, the connection is beautiful. The fleetingness is, the idea that you might dissipate at that very moment into the primal energy of the universe. You might, a little part of you might be saying, but wait, I like me, I want to stick around a little bit here. So yeah.
Let's keep that veil in place. I don't want to see beyond it the whole time.
Exactly.
That's cool though, because it kind of, with our earlier discussion, connects to like we were talking about. Some people have the empathy, and then some people don't. Like with Erkenwald, and it's a similar thing, right? I like considering that too. Of like, it's kind of a comfort. Oh, the universe is huge, so I'm a mote of dust. So in some things I do, it's okay if it doesn't work out. And other people, they go there and they're instantly just like they can't handle it.
That's right. I think people respond differently to that experience. You're absolutely right. Yeah. For some people, it is terrifying. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it kind of makes me think that, if like Buddha was sitting by a tree and he saw the elf, he would just kind of accept it, and nothing untoward would happen. Things would just keep going on the way they were going.
I think they would just wave at each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Call it a day.
This is entirely unrelated. There is in the first book, there's like a worm kind of worm creature that used in the torture chamber. Yeah. Whatever happened to that?
Oh, it's still there, I guess. I don't know. I mean, yeah, we didn't revisit the Grudug in this after the first book at all. I don't know. I hope they didn't forget to feed it.
I was thinking that was going to show up with Ballsack again, but
yeah.
Oh yeah, thank you for Ballsack. We were unironically really happy to see him again.
I'm a Ballsack.
I warned you that book 3 was about Ballsack, right? So yeah, he made his comeback, sort of, I guess, but he did.
His scenes were incredible from the beginning, and like his visions and like his fragmented mind, and it was perfect. Your use of language was impeccable.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I that's about as close as I've ever been to insanity myself, I think, is trying to write those scenes with Ballsack. And wow, I felt a little bad for him. From the first book, being someone that you really probably don't like very much, to becoming hopefully someone that is much more sympathetic, someone who was treated awfully, and ends up being vital as well, because they would never have found out about the way into the dungeon without Bagsack. So tried to make all that sort of converge there at the end, with Sarah swimming and Bagsack getting his way out of the dungeon, and that being a way to get back with Dayraven. So yeah, he does play an important role, and ironically too, because he doesn't know they're trying to get to Dayraven, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he does eventually figure out, oh, that's the guy I tried to kill once. Yeah. So they have and Dayraven, of course, it's okay. It's all right. He doesn't want him to frighten Bagsack, but yeah. So.
Yeah, I quite liked the part, like, it's a small bit, but when he's just on the streets and he's mad, he thinks to himself that he's proud that he's able to remember this thing, like what a chamber pot is used for. And I think that was like a great humanizing moment and a great way to show how far he fell. Very nice of you to give him a job in the library at the end, by the way.
Yes. Yeah. He does get I hope it's a comfortable retirement. So yeah.
Go ahead, Dusty.
Oh no, that's just reminded me of the guy who became the Supreme Priest from book 1.
Oh yeah.
Oh yes. The nice priest that Dayraven and Imhar met.
Yes, that was a fantastic callback. Thank you.
Yeah.
We were all very satisfied with that ending.
I'm glad, and I'm glad you remembered him. Sequara remembered him. So yeah, or Sequara's going around trying to fix the world and very much feeling bereft herself. But that was one thing I was glad I could do, was to give Torland a decent king, much better king, and hopefully a much better supreme priest. Of course, this whole religion is potentially going to change a lot now that they've had a second prophet, don't you think?
I think it would have to.
Yeah, required.
I think one of the things I really like about the series is that it really demonstrates, dare I say, the importance of karma, of sometimes even small acts of kindness or acts of cruelty having reverberations throughout the series and constantly coming back. And even if you aren't the one that's affected by, your actions, like even the small ones keep having consequences that need to be realized. That there's no like free actions.
Yeah. I really tried hard to make it so that book 3 would almost change the way you experience book 1. That there are connections between them and things that suddenly take on much more meaning that happened in book 1. I hope that was the case. That was my goal anyway, was to. And that's the advantage of taking 18 years to write your bloody trilogy. You can keep going back and and putting these things in and making sure that they interconnect. So the interconnection between the 3 books was very important to me. So yeah, but yeah, I like that there's going to be a nicer supreme priest, and I tried to show it was important to me in this book as well, show that not all the Torlanders are just baddies. We have in Edge, for example, a Torlander soldier who I hope feels like a decent guy. Who feels like somebody that's wrestling with his conscience and trying to find a better way. And the first thing he does when we meet him is he tries to spare this girl he meets from his soldiers who are very unpleasant to her. And then he sees her again and he saves her life. And then he feels responsible for her. This is a guy with a conscience. Is it because he had a daughter, as he says himself? I have a daughter her age, and I just couldn't bring myself to hurt her. Is it because of that? In his case, how does empathy work there? How does compassion work? But yeah, I tried to show that the Torlanders aren't just pure evil. They're not all just bad, and that people like Edge they're even Sequara. She goes and she cleanses Astrolad. She kills a bunch of people ruthlessly, and then meets a few Torlanders as she's with Queen Rona and heading up through Adanon and trying to retake it. And the Torlanders are already ready to surrender because they've been converted by the prophet. And some of them meet her, and she says, "You know what? I like these guys, but if I had met them on Astrolad, I would have roasted them." Right? So yeah.
Reminiscent of that one Christmas in World War One.
Yes.
The opposing forces, exchanged gifts, played a game of soccer, I think it was. And then,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, even the people you're trying to kill are human. So
there's just so many instances of that. Oh, hi, kiddo. Sorry, hold on. I always like to talk about during the Cold War. In Europe, they were a little bit closer together, so there was like an airport on one side of the side of Germany and one on another. And every once in a while, with bad weather, a plane would land on the wrong side, and instead of like capturing them, they just say, "Hi, you're on the wrong side," and they just fly home. So,
yeah, we are capable of humanity, which is those are wonderful stories for a reason. I guess they prove Dayraven's point that maybe we are. I hope. As a collective, I don't know. I definitely had my pessimistic moments when I think, yeah, we're pretty much doomed to destroy ourselves, but who knows? Who am I to say? Those little stories give me some hope, at least.
There's plenty to argue on both sides of the issue. Yeah.
You ever read or write short fiction?
I did try my hand at a few short stories, and I haven't looked at them in many years. But nothing related to the Edan trilogy. I wrote some. One was actually set in Kathmandu, where I lived. So I wrote it. Yeah, I was very directly drawing from Hindu mythology in that one, but it was set in modern Kathmandu.
Hmm.
So yeah, it was about the revival of a Naga, and very much related to the this modern state of Kathmandu as well. I wrote one set in my native state of Vermont as well, set in a state park where I worked once upon a time. And that's kind of a ghost story, I guess. So
Hmm.
yeah, I have a couple old stories bang out there, some short ones, but I have no idea how awful they are because I haven't looked at them in years. So I I suspect that I would probably want to edit them a lot now.
I have a pitch. Worm POV.
Hmm.
Hmm,
I'd read it.
okay, I love it. Yeah, I have a
What was that
couple
worm
ideas.
called?
Gorsarha, do you mean, or the?
No, the worm in book one that
Oh,
the
Grudug,
nasty.
Grudug. You want the Grudug POV? Oh.
Yeah.
That would be a very because they don't have eyes. So that would
Very
be
experimental.
very experimental. Yeah. That would take that would be a good exercise. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. That'd be a good writer exercise.
You
Write
could
a short story from the POV of a Grudug.
to convey its alienness, you could write it in Old English and then recite it on your channel.
Yeah,
And don't give a translation.
you want to know what it says? Get an Old English dictionary. Yeah. Yeah.
I say this a lot about your books, but the one of the stories in here feels very old. Um, the one where the Torlinders versus the Thioths, and they kill the Thioth king, and now they're like, oh, we're screwed now. And then it kind of cuts to later. Oh, and this is how we solved the problem with the Weregild. I really
Yeah.
liked that. Could you elaborate more on like why you decided to make that choice? Like basically cut to when like get to the climax and then cut to when it's already solved.
Yeah, well, for one thing, I think I had already written enough battles,
Hmm.
maybe too many battles for some people. So I didn't feel like I needed to do that anymore. And I also thought this was a way to uh, explore the character of Ludicon, who was the captain of the mercenary company, had been the lieutenant under Orvandil, and so and they had this continuous debate going on within their company because it was Dayraven's, not for that long, but it was his company, the mercenary company of Ettenstone. So yeah, it was a choice that I made because I knew I wanted to go back to those soldiers that we
Hmm.
met in the first book. That's another one. So there's Bagsack, and then there's the soldiers of the mercenary company. And I had already set this thing up in order to weaken Torland. That's
Hmm.
another aspect of Dayraven. What he was doing inadvertently was weakening Torland because he was converting a lot of its soldiers into pacifists. But also, Torland had its own internal conflict caused by Erkenwald's narcissism, caused by his callousness, and that was something that happened in book 2, where he essentially allowed one of his sacrificed, if you will, one of his dukes, and then the neighboring duke wanted the territory, and he was a lick spittle, and Erkenwald was going to reward him for that, which is very careless. So yeah, I mean, there was an internal conflict that was weakening Torland as well. So it was. I felt unnecessary to go into the combat
Hmm.
and to resolve that to a point where I could bring, because this was another important reunion for me. Because Ludicon hasn't made up his mind. There are some of his soldiers who are convinced Dayraven is the prophet. And then there are others who are much more skeptical. And they're having this constant debate in their company and that I hope reflects the broader society as well. And Ludicon hasn't made up his mind. He remembers that kid as being a bit of an idiot, but there was something about him, and he had seen it from the beginning, and he really wanted to make up his mind. That was the main reason. Maybe he felt some loyalty to Orvandil and Dayraven there, but I think a lot of it was just simply he needed to make up his mind. Is this kid prophet? Is there a, maybe he's wondering, is there a God? He's lived a difficult life. I tried to give a bit more of his backstory in his chapters too, to explain how did this guy end up being such a jaded person? How did he end up being so bitter? And yet he's capable of real loyalty. Like when his soldiers die, there are a couple scenes there that I hope where there's some real pathos there, where he's cradling one of the guys he's been with all these years. He's basically more of a brother to him than his real brother, so than his biological brother. So yeah, I was just trying to explore his humanity, and he could be representative of a lot of people thinking, this Dayraven guy, is he really a prophet? What does that mean? So yeah, that's what I was trying to do with him. And at that point, it just wasn't important. It also sets up things for Orvindil having Volse killed.
Very convenient for Orvindil.
Puts a lot of, now he never would have wanted it, of course, because he's very loyal to his cousin, but it puts a lot of things, question marks, in Orvindil's mind. Principally, do I have a chance? And it's an awful thing to think when your friend and cousin dies, but it's also a very natural thing to think. Do I have a chance to get back with my old sweetheart? That probably was a bigger question to him than, maybe I could be king now. That would be a secondary thing. But yeah,
I get it.
When you gave him that dream, I think it was a dream earlier on when they were like on the boat. I was like, something's gonna happen and he's gonna get his chance. So
yeah. In book 2, I think he was more or less daydreaming. It's the first time you find out that he left Grimrick. He left the Theos because of this quarrel with his foster brother over a woman. Osinia is her name. So yeah, who ends up marrying his cousin Volse and becoming the queen of the Theos. So yeah. Hopefully his arc was pretty satisfying too. It's one thing that's hard to do when you're writing a book with all this cast of characters is to give everybody a satisfying arc. So there's always going to be somebody who's like, I didn't get enough of Imhar, or I didn't get enough of, Gnorn or whatever, but, you do your best. Imhar, I would have loved to have had more Imhar chapters, but that's about as much as I felt was right. And I hope that the scene at the end when the dream of him being reunited with his sister doesn't exactly happen, but he does find Saren in the end, thanks to Dayraven. And that's, I hope, with all the death and the sacrifice and the suffering, I hope that that's a bright spot for people, that Imhar gets to reunite with family at the end, and that Saren has a home at the end of all of this. That was important to me, to try to give a little bit of a little bit of a bright spot there at the end. Hopefully that came across.
It seemed to me that she could have had 3 homes, even one with Edge, one with Sequara, and one with Imhar.
yeah,
very true. Yeah, but I think Sequara rightly,
yes,
even though she had never met her uncle, I think she rightly because she knows Imhar. She spent time with him, and probably realized he would be a great father figure for Saren, and would take care of her and would love her, and he needs her as much as she needs him. They've both gone through some terrible losses. So
yeah, they can be a big happy family with Queen Rona. I quite liked Queen Rona as well.
Good.
too.
Yes, yeah. I like her too. I really like her. she's a really wonderful leader, I think. Yeah,
and human. Very, she has those ones. No, Imhar, treat me disrespectfully for once. I need to be told that I'm a woman.
Yeah. That I hope that, I mean, of course, I'm a male trying to write a female character, and hopefully that comes across as convincing, that she, as strong as she is, as the role she undertakes is to essentially try to save first her own kingdom. She is the backbone of the resistance against the Tortlanders, and then she keeps doing the same thing in Astrolad. So she's a very strong person. But even the strongest person needs to be vulnerable sometimes, needs to have that soft spot, needs to be human, and she spends all day posturing and just to have a moment of just being human and having that intimacy is really something. Like, I think I was partly probably inspired by Queen Elizabeth of England, who the first, not the second, the one from the Renaissance, not the modern one. Queen Elizabeth was an incredible leader. She kept this country together in a time when Catholics and Protestants were killing each other over in Europe, and she managed to stay monarch when lots of people wanted to marry her off, and she was, publicly had this persona of being this strong, capable person. But she left us this wonderful poem about one of her marriage proposals that publicly she had to spurn, but apparently privately she wanted to marry the guy. She had feelings for him, and left us this beautiful poem. And it's just like this glimpse into the human, this vulnerable, soft person who has this facade that people know, but then underneath that is a very warm heart. And yeah, it's a beautiful little poem about her inner turmoil, that publicly she has to reject this suitor, but privately she really would have liked to have been with him. So yeah, I think of Rona in a similar way, like as a very capable, powerful, intelligent, but also needing some human moments, So hopefully that works. And then Imhar, that relationship really does, I hope, serve to mature Imhar as well, because he starts out as kind of a womanizer, and then I think he's a bit out of his league in a way when it comes to Rona. And instead of being the initiator, he's kind of having to, he's the junior partner in the relationship, as it were.
Yeah.
So he's also matured a lot, I hope, because of the tragedies that he's witnessed, that the losses. He lost his uncle. He's witnessed some awful things. He's had to do some terrible things, and he has matured a lot, I think, by the end of this. But he was always, I think, a good-hearted person, and his relationship with Dayraven prepared him in a way for the relationship that he establishes with Rona's son, with Runan. He becomes a mentor, an older brother almost, the way he was with Dayraven. So yeah, sorry.
I'm sure you have the answer to this written down somewhere, right? Or just off the top of your head. Can you give me a quick head count of who's still alive in Astrolad? How many people does Sequara have to work with for her rebuilding effort?
Yeah, so more than you think. More than you
Okay.
think. So I only showed the resistance fighters who are hiding out in the forest. But there are pockets elsewhere. There are more civilians, as it were, who are hiding in this quite large forest area. So they're just deeper within. So yeah, there's a fair number of survivors on the island. But in the more obvious areas, like Kiriath, for example, the city, it's a ghost town, just burned down, ravaged. But yeah, there are people hiding in caves, in forests, in various places. Yeah, in my imagination, I don't probably explain that, but yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. I just want to be sure that they're going to be okay.
Yeah. No, Astrolad has a future. It has a future.
Good.
Yeah, but you might see a bit of in the sequel. So.
I mean, you've already sold me on the sequel, Phil. But no need to pitch it more. As soon as I heard Siren might be in it, that's good enough for me.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, but there'll be new characters as well. About 15 years or so have gone by when the sequel starts. Yeah.
Shall we call it?
Okay.
Yeah, it's quite late Eastern time. Well, it's getting late Eastern time.
It is after 10. Yeah.
All right. Well, Philip, just first off, thanks for writing the series, and thanks for taking the time to chat with us. This has been great. And for everybody listening, I hope you've really enjoyed all of our episodes of Edan and our discussions with Philip. And if you haven't read them, if you've made it this far, you definitely should. So go out and do that. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thanks so much, guys. I appreciate it very much.
Thanks, Philip.
Yeah, these are very fun chats. They're very fun.